Instead I stood by a window, in the room which corresponded with Margaret Lancaster's, and thought over all that I had learned. Out of the chaos in my mind certain things were emerging. For one thing, everyone at the house that night had, either tacitly or openly, suspected that the crime was essentially a crime of the Crescent itself. Apparently George Talbot suspected Brian Dalton, and Mr. Dalton suspected George. Both Lydia Talbot and Mrs. Dalton, not to mention Mother, seemed convinced that the answer lay in the Lancaster house itself, and only Mrs. Talbot openly believed that it was a plain case of robbery. But that last theory seemed to me to be absurd. Even I knew that gold was heavy. One did not pick it up and simply run away with it. Again, none of us actually knew that the gold and currency were missing. And if they were, I wondered vaguely if there had been time between Mrs. Talbot's departure and Jim's entrance for the old lady to be killed, the chest dragged out and opened, bags of gold or bundles of notes placed on the porch roof, and the chest replaced under the bed. For that at least we did know that night, although I do not remember how we knew it, unless it was from Lydia Talbot, who had an uncanny way of securing information. The chest was under the bed when the police got there. I wondered about Eben, only to dismiss him. It had been 3:30 when I sat down at my window, and the sound of the mower had not ceased once until that time at 4 o'clock when he stopped to mop his hot face, and Emily had screamed in the house across. No, not Eben. Not even any of our servants, so far as we could tell. All of them save Peggy at the Lancasters had been with us for years on end. All save Helen Wellington's, that is, and they had packed and gone long before the crime. I thought of Peggy and dismissed her, a slim soft little creature, whom I had once seen walking with Holmes on the path through no man's land, but whose face showed only a sort of weak amiability. Then who else? Not a delivery driver for one of our shops. The Crescent rigidly insists on delivery at the rear, and the Lancaster rear porch had been occupied all the afternoon. Not Holmes, more recent than most of the others, but driving Mother that afternoon until 4:30, nor the Daltons' butler, Joseph, identified in the general canvass that night by Laura Dalton as having brought her iced tea at 4:15. Who else but Jim, then? I began again that sort of desperate roll call of the Crescent, Helen Wellington in town, and with no possible motive, Mrs. Dalton drinking iced tea and Brian Dalton in a pair of dirty overalls working over his car in their garage, Mother out, Eben mowing, Lydia gone shopping at 2:30 and sitting the rest of the afternoon in an air-cooled moving picture theater, George downtown at his bank, and Mrs. Talbot carefully locked in her bedroom and taking a nap. It was Lydia Talbot that afternoon who had come nearest to making plain statement. I suppose they stood it as long as they could, she had said, and then became uneasy and spoke of what devoted daughters they had always been. One thing was clear even to me, however. That was that the secret of the Lancasters' gold was not a secret at all. Probably from the moment Jim Wellington had brought out his first canvas sack, with its neck neatly wired and sealed with lead, our grapevine telegraph had sent the news from one end of the crescent to the other. There would be even no secret as to where it was kept, with Peggy wiping the chest daily with an oiled cloth, as we wipe all our furniture, and brushing the floor under that tragic bed. A dozen people knew, 100 might have learned. And as I did not then know of those screens which would not move, it seemed to me that some one of those 100 could have scaled the porch roof, slid into the room, opened the chest with the key after his deadly work was done, and escaped with his treasure. But how? In a car? No car had passed our house from 3:30 to 4. That I knew. Then who else? The street cleaner? I had hardly ever noticed him. No one seems to notice the street cleaner, for some reason. But now I recalled him, a tall thin gangling man in dirty white clothes and helmet, who was a constant source of irritation to the Crescent, which regarded him as especially employed by the city to brush its leaves into heaps and then let the wind blow them about again. Perhaps I was not entirely rational that night, but the picture of this individual pushing his waistcoat on wheels persisted in my mind. After all, if the Crescent knew of the gold and the key to the chest around the old lady's neck, then its servants knew it. And what the servants knew he might know. In a way, too, he had access to all our properties, for whenever his cart was filled he had a way of trundling it back to no man's land in there, against a city ordinance, dumping and burning it. He could have known not only about the gold. He could easily have known about the axe in the woodshed. Moreover, so regular are our habits, it might have been possible for him to know that Emily dressed while Mrs. Lancaster slept between 3:30 and 4, that the old gentleman walked at that time, leaving the screen door open, that it was Margaret's afternoon off, as well as Peggy's, and he could have seen that the other two maids were in the rear of the house. Moreover, the times coincided. While I had not noticed him that day, he generally reached us by mid-afternoon. And again, it seemed to me that his card answered the question as to how the gold had been taken, if it had. I have told all this circumstantially, not because it made any real contribution to the solving of our crimes, but because it explains how I myself in a small way became involved in them. For shortly before midnight, and while the inspector and Sullivan were still gazing at that chest as it was being dragged from under the bed, I was on my way to the Lancaster house with my theory. I got out of the front door without rousing anyone, but no sooner had I set foot on the street pavement than a shadowy figure in a rubber coat looked up and flashed a light in my face. "Not allowed to go this way, miss," a voice said. "Don't be absurd. I want to see Inspector Briggs." "I don't think he'll see you. He's busy." "Nevertheless, I intend to try," I said firmly, and with that he fell back, although he followed me all the way. At the Lancaster walk he stopped. "I'll be here when you come out," he told me. "It isn't a healthy neighborhood just now for young ladies alone." With which cheerful remark he lighted a cigarette and lounged away. The Lancaster house was more fully lighted than I had realized until I stood before it.